good unspecified time period on some sort of calendar. It could be day, could be night, depends where in the universe you are. Welcome to Richard and Karl present Deep Space and Dragons. I'm Richard.
And I'm Carl, and we're here to just have a casual conversation about whatever nerdy topics catch our attention. Today's topic is primarily the 2021 release of Dune, Part 1.
Dune. So, casual spoiler tag. So, if you would like to watch this video and are mildly concerned we'll be spoiling a remake of a movie that's older than me, you have three options available. First, see it in the movie theater if it's safe and you're comfortable to do so. Second, watch it on HBO Plus. Third, just casually read half of a 500-page novel.
According to most of the reviews that I've read, it's about two-thirds of the novel. Also, I do wonder how many pages of the novel are taken up by the glossary.
I mean, that is some respect there. But, before we transition it into things... Actually, no, I'm not going to ask what's new in the Karlverse this week. I have a pretty good idea. So, instead of what's new, I'm going to ask you something pseudo-random, not a random question of the day. But here's my question for you. If you had to choose between living on an ice planet, a desert planet, or a jungle planet with giant spiders, what would you pick?
An ice planet, a desert planet, or a jungle planet with giant spiders?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, you've given me the most information about the jungle planet, and I feel like if I am living on this jungle planet, I'm not living there alone, and so there has to be some society of people who have tamed the jungle spiders and used them to traverse the jungle. And that just sounds way better than being too hot or too cold all the time.
Fair enough.
Well, what would your choice be?
So, it's the classic, if you're cold, you can put on clothing, and if you're hot, you're kind of hosed. So I survived a day where my left eye froze shut on the walk to school, and it was technically warmer on Mars that day, you know, because Saskatchewan is basically the ice planet. So I think I'm going to pick the ice planet because I have the experience. And here's the thing about giant spiders. Just because you know you're there doesn't mean the spiders didn't win, and now they're the only thing on the jungle planet.
Ooh, yeah, you're right. I did not think about the possibility of a apocalypse.
All right, so to pivot into Dune, with this beautiful book cover that you can look at any direction and it spells Dune, that actually came up in one of my design classes as recently as last week.
Huh.
Because, yeah, it's just 3-0. It's like they literally just spell out Dune with a bunch of U's.
Huh.
So,
I did not know that.
one thing that was fascinating as we went through Dune together is I cannot... how can I put this? What was the word I used? Like, source amnesia, where when watching Dune you feel like you've seen it already because so many things had successfully ripped it off?
Something like that. Like, the original book was written in 1965. So it's pretty hard for any sci-fi after 1965 to not at least use one idea from what is probably the most popular sci-fi book of all time at this point.
Like, one thing that really struck both of us was spice. So, the premise of Dune largely evolves around spice, commonly known as space Adderall, or space cocaine, not commonly known as
I'm pretty sure they have a real name for it. I don't have a copy of Dune handy, so I can't look it up in the glossary. But I'm pretty sure it does have an actual name that's not just spice.
Amusingly, I do have a copy of Dune on my desktop right now, a legally acquired PDF of it, and it is melange. The fictional drug is called melange, or spice,
yes, that's it.
Which most commonly known in the extended Dune universe spin-off called the Star Wars Episode 4: A New Hope. Spice running is a competent way of any space show ever. The drug is spice. Han Solo was a spice runner from the spice mines.
Well, and then the episodes 7, 8, 9 trilogy, Poe is the same actor that plays the Duke of Atreides.
I think you got it.
And first things first, Poe in the Star Wars universe was also a spice runner. And second, the Duke, because he was the same actor, they just decided that he actually wanted to be a pilot and royal nobility. But when his father died, he was forced into the noble lifestyle.
So I do definitely love the running idea that any space western, which I do believe Dune is the more accurate origin of the space western, because even though space western implies cowboys, taverns, pubs, the desert planet is the most common place for the space western to be. And the concept of you're wearing your cloaks and your kind of steampunky outfit on the desert planet while there's an evil empire, typically. I feel like Dune gave us the space western.
Well, I mean, most of the articles that I've read have described it as a spice opera.
I love that. Also, I feel like also disclaiming that I very much enjoyed this version of Dune. I enjoyed it.
I also found it super enjoyable. But there was one particular plot device. Character. So, spoilers, as mentioned at the start of the episode. Dr. Yue, he is the Asian physician for the royal family of Atreides. And wouldn't you know it, he happens to be an evil Asian doctor that betrays them.
So, after you brought this up, the idea of using that incredibly troublesome trope in the movie, I felt the need to go into the original book to find the actual description of the character. Because as a writer myself, flex, buy my book, that'd be great. As a writer myself, I specifically made sure to not put in mentions of race. I used hair colors, eye colors, occasionally used face structure, body structure, but never in a way where you could figure out a character's race. To the point where I've received fan art of the same character, Ciora, and one piece of the fan art was Irish, and the other one was African. Both are equally canonically true in my brain. Actually, to be fair, it's one of those things where I'm like, oh, I kind of like both of these. I actually think I like the second one better, but was not what I was visualizing at all. But this is great. This would probably go on the book jacket if I put characters on my book jacket. But in the description of, first off, Dr. Yue sounds like an Asian name. His first name is Wellington. I feel the need to point out that when reading the original book, they describe his hair color and his eye color. And he's described as gaunt. That's it. But another article, when I looked it up, immediately pointed out that they finally cast it in the remake to match their imagination and acted like it was an act of inclusivity.
Well, one of the things I find the most interesting about this particular point here, and it doesn't ruin the movie by any stretch of the imagination. I mean, unless you're actually genuinely offended by the stereotype.
Which is actually kind of fair.
But in the book, there's an entire plot arc about how this particular doctor was basically brainwashed to not be able to harm anyone. And then he has to try and figure a way to get around his brainwashery to get his revenge on the guy who kidnaps and kills his wife. And it's like that character had a lot of depth, which was then completely reduced to the evil Asian doctor stereotype.
And what's fascinating is, because movies have a bad habit of whitewashing. Freely admit that. If you've seen Avatar: The Last Airbender, that is one thing that does as much damage to your eyes as bleach. Either the paper cuts or the chemical or the manga. So, I fully understand wanting representation in movies. I am a pretty active champion of it, honestly, where I honestly don't believe a character's race affects the character. So if you want to literally just roll the dice to give a better range of representation for characters, does not ruin my enjoyment of a movie. And for a movie set 8,000 years in the future, the statistical odds that we'd even have race in a recognizable form as it is today are practically zero.
Right.
You know, from evolution, genes passing through, intermingling of populous groups, traveling to space among the stars. So to end up with an Asian mysticism acupuncture doctor in the year 10,000 is insane.
Yeah. I definitely agree. Like I say, if I were going to point a weak point out of the movie, I think that particular character might have deserved a bit more screen time and a bit more depth before the betrayal, because it is very reductive of the character, and he becomes a plot device to move the story along. But by the same token, the book is incredibly dense, and the movie, while only 2/3 of the original book, is still a 2.5-hour movie with a ton of content and some very beautiful cinematography.
Hashtag release the Snyder Cut. I mean, one thing I saw, because I don't have a ton of experience of the original Dune. I think I watched it once as a small child, and I only remembered sandworms.
Mm-hmm.
But I did watch an honest trailer of the original movie. And quite frankly, if you try to compress down all of Dune into a single movie, you can't. You're dealing with a Lord of the Rings caliber book, if not more densely packed, because it has such heavy concepts. But I will say one other flaw, because you can't review a book or movie without saying something bad about it, or else you don't look as intellectual. So I also have to point out a flaw. And my flaw is I couldn't tell if it was 3D at the start because I couldn't tell with the sand whether or not it was supposed to be blurry.
Yeah. So I don't know if it's the same in all movie theaters across the country, but my experience with movie theaters is, you have the trailers, and half of them are 2D, and then they have a little animation that says, "Please put on your glasses," and then the other half of the trailers are in 3D. But this particular movie, all the trailers were in 2D, and then it never warned us to put on our glasses. I wasn't even sure that the movie was actually starting. And then all the sand is like, it's all dusty. You can't tell if it's out of focus or not.
And another thing that's like kind of hard to track, because so the Force is most definitely similar but different to the vaguely established magic psychic premonition powers that our Gary Sue character had.
Just as a side note, it's called The Way.
And the Way of the Force definitely gave you a situation of it being difficult to tell if something was a flash forward or happening, but oh man, does it lead to a cool scene I cannot in good conscience spoil later, because they use the vision to lure me into a false sense of security for something awesome to happen. You know the one where future who sends Aquaman to a desert? That was just a misplay. The strategic value is so lost sending Aquaman to fight in the desert.
Jason Momoa is definitely not typecast, but Aquaman being one of the best DC movies that's been released in a long time, definitely we keep calling him Aquaman, even though it's like desert planet. He's clearly not Aquaman. He's just a badass.
Now, you see, my headcanon is he was Aquaman, but it never came up because he was on a desert planet. He also, he did a fantastic job in Stargate Atlantis. So he is very similar in character. He was Ronan the Runner in Stargate Atlantis, where jumping from planet to planet, being hunted by aliens for sport. He had a sword in a Stargate show and was the only guy to ever actually flex that. So they let him be an equally badass character in this. And yeah, as for our protagonists, though, as I mentioned before, the notion of the Mary Sue character in Star Wars The Force Awakens, where one of the toxic arguments, because if you talk about Star Wars, it just devolves to toxicity, is it bad to have a main character that's magically good at everything? Where the plot of this one of the subplots in this was definitely the main character was literally magically good at everything.
Mm-hmm.
So my question to you then, my co-host friend, is what were your thoughts on the protagonist of this movie? Because there was so much things I enjoyed going on that I have mixed feelings about. What was even his name? I am drawing a blank on the name of the protagonist of this movie.
His name was Paul.
That's probably why. Not Paul with
very,
no
very
apostrophes, no umlauts, just Paul.
just Paul. So, I mean, the character has royal status, and so it's very clear that he has access to massive libraries to learn a lot of things that he's supposed to be studying, and they make clear like he trains with Jason Momoa, who
is awesome.
He's just a beast. So his combat skill and prowess isn't necessarily that unexpected, especially as compared to like the native Fremen that live on Dune. I mean, not to say that natives can't have advanced forms of fighting or martial arts, but their access to information and all the different training methods, I don't find it unreasonable that he was actually adequate as a combatant, I guess.
Well, one thing to follow up on that is the movie's kind of unclear because can you be native of a planet when we're a space-faring race, or were the Fremen were just got to that specific planet first? Because humans didn't start out on Dune, to the best of my knowledge. Which the planet's not called Dune, but that's the name of the movie.
Oh, I get it, because of all the dunes.
But yes. It's one of those things where they definitely highly implied that the main character had been training their entire life in space martial arts, and had also had magic psychic powers that are being trained on the entire movie. But I honestly, I think they did the best they could with what they were given, almost, because the Luke Skywalker character has never really been the focus of very many series for me. I can't think of very many shows in general where they make the best character the protagonist. Because you kind of need somebody to explain the series to, which is a role most protagonists end up being, is they come off kind of like scatterbrained and dumb, so the other characters can explain the setting, plot, and characters to them.
It is kind of interesting. This movie definitely did a very good job of showing, instead of telling, all of the political background.
Oh, I definitely agree.
Like a lot of movies will just be huge exposition dump, and there's usually that one character that's the new guy that he's just used to dump exposition to. But it's like, no, everybody in this movie knew what was going on, and it's like the Harkins, the enemies. The Paul is training with one of his combat mentors, and he's not really taking it seriously. And then the mentor pulls a move that would have killed him, and he's like, "Yeah, you cannot commit. You gotta be there, because I have seen the eyes of our enemies, and they are savages." And it really instead of just being like, oh, they're
the bad
evil bad
title
guys,
crawl,
and explaining.
Could you
who they
imagine
are.
if Dune tried to do a Star Wars title crawl to catch everybody up?
Title crawl. Oh man, title crawls are probably the worst.
The only time I allow title crawls is I appreciate title crawls between Star Wars Episode 5 had a solid title crawl because they just wanted to get to the action in res, right? So it's like, okay, there's a time skip between these movies, so we're going to use a title crawl to explain the time skip as efficiently as we can. The title crawl wasn't terrible in that situation. Although, in Star Wars Episode 9, the title crawl was really, the main villain got revealed in a title crawl.
Yeah, that was pretty awful.
Apparently,
I will say also, Star Wars Episode 4, sci-fi had been around in print form for a while, a la Dune, 1965, where I believe the first Star Wars came out in 1984.
I will be fact-checking, but continue.
But so, in terms of moviegoers and intelligent media
1977.
consumption, 77. Wow, I was way off. Still, that's more than a decade for sci-fi to be around in print. But like when they were releasing movies, they were going to release a Star Trek movie and a Star Wars movie here, and they decided to back off from the Star Trek movie because they figured there wasn't enough space in the cinema scene for two sci-fi movies.
Yeah,
and now it's like half the movies we see are sci-fi.
Well, it's kind of funny because like we have the hard side. We have like sci-fi very often gets almost like broken into gritty and clean. Where Star Trek was always the clean sci-fi. Things are working, things are new, things are shiny and sparkly. And then Dune was the gritty sci-fi where you have your ornithopters, which kind of work. You have scratches and things. Your planet is cruddy. No one wants to live on it, but as a valuable resource. Like, you could definitely watch Dune ripple through so many things. And a lot of, like, the best sci-fi takes more from Dune than it does from Star Trek, in my opinion.
But back to the title crawl bit, audiences of the time were just unfamiliar with the concept of sci-fi. Like moviegoers, avid readers would have had sci-fi for quite a while, and I mean, like Isaac Asimov he's probably one of the most famous sci-fi writers of all time.
And I mean, keep in mind, Doctor Who had been running for a while by the time the first Star Wars got movied.
Yeah, but so like I find a title crawl to be a little bit more excusable for a movie from that era, where like people need a little bit more setup in order to be able to enjoy the movie, and that was a lot of content to try and show instead of tell.
I will follow up with that
But
too,
then,
because go ahead.
You come to Episode 9 of Star Wars, where they literally introduce the main villain getting resurrected in a title crawl, and it was just
another thing too is level of common concepts, because when we're watching Dune, there's a few things that popped up that we know from our growing up playing video games, playing Metroid. Metroid had a weird overlap because I recently started Metroid Dread, as my co-host is aware, and thematically following after Dune, in tone they're very similar. Which is a weird comment to make, but you feel me on that, right?
I do.
So what's interesting is, so the first shot at something like Dune, people aren't going to be familiar with a lot of sci-fi concepts we've seen enough of now that if I say shields, you immediately think, yeah, a force field of energy projecting a physical object. You go back to the 60s, you're not going to know what a shield is and think energy before you think physical thing you hold in front of your face. The shields won't just be up. You won't just have a barrier.
And then looking at the older version of Dune, the scenes where they're using the shields and they look like Minecraft characters.
Exactly. So, like, shields, they didn't have to explain what the shields were. We instantly knew, we've been so trained by sci-fi that we even knew that the shield going from blue to red meant it was weakening. We just knew that intrinsically. There's no reason for you to think blue means full health and red means low health on a shield, except for decades of gaming.
The shields are actually another cool instance of showing, not telling, where most of the characters in the show use swords. It's sci-fi. Why aren't they using guns? Well, it shows very clearly that fast-moving objects get stopped by the shield, where slower-moving objects turn the shield red and go through and you can actually hit people. So it was both a convenient plot device to have awesome sword showdowns in a sci-fi future film, and then also like they showed it so elegantly in that training montage where they also let us know that the Harkins are savages. And
they did a great job, like, using their runtime to get so much exposition out cleanly without slowing down the progress of the movie. Like, instead of
without having that exposition dump character that doesn't know anything, because all the characters we're introduced to know these things.
Well, it's kind of like we have the scene where he's being interrogated by the not Sith about his not Jedi powers, and is like, put your hand in the box, I hold the needle to your neck. And they explained all of these characters and their motivations so cleanly, but we're also watching an awesome scene. But I will say, the Dune soundtrack doesn't have a quiet mode. Like, every single scene's like, this movie is epic and you will feel it in your bone marrow from the soundtrack. And I'm like, yeah, I feel it, you're right, you made an epic. It feels epic. The scope is epic. What I hate is when something puts a sci-fi label on and you're just the US military with your current gear. In what is basically, you're just filming in a small town and you just write the word space on it. Like, I want laser guns. I want homing smart bullets. I want beam shields. Like, oh man. But that's the thing is, part of why Dune works now is, for example, we go back to the 60s and the closest thing you got to a spaceship is a shuttle. Your brain's not instantly going to see a weird object without having to explain, oh, this is a ship that travels through space. Right. Because they briefly mentioned maybe 2 lines that, oh, spice allows interstellar travel. And your brain now has been trained by sci-fi to put in enough logical hoops to be like, Adderall makes brain smarter, used for math to calculate vectors to travel spaceships. Like, as us as viewers, we didn't need them to explain any more than drugs help space travel. Because we've seen enough sci-fi, like even The Expanse, which was a great show, very much enjoyed The Expanse, where they would literally shoot you up with chemicals while you're doing high G turns so your body wouldn't explode. So we're not strangers to this point as the idea of using chemical enhancements to help with your sci-fi stuff.
Right.
Like, we're pretty familiar with opioids, tragically, at this particular juncture in our society, and can understand how wars would be fought over super opioids.
But one thing we haven't actually really touched on yet are the giant worms themselves.
So I still say they murder for fun, but go ahead and bring up your point.
Well, this is something that applies across a lot more mediums than just film. Games and movies like Monster Hunter, for example. I find it very interesting. It's easy to understand why writers are more capable of creating complex political systems than they are of creating complex ecosystems that actually make sense. But I really do wonder, in this expansive desert, what do the worms normally eat? Like, why for a worm to be 400 meters long, like that's like the size of the CN Tower.
Shout out to the CN Tower.
But so it's like, what does this massive animal actually do to sustain itself and create enough energy for that much biomass?
So my theory.
Well, I was going to kind of segue into Monster Hunter because again they have multiple giant monsters, but how do these giant predators not just completely destroy the ecosystem?
So I have 3 thoughts on this one. So thought the first, because I've definitely had this conversation in depth with Panda, is the idea that because we're on an alien world in a fictional setting, the easiest way to have giant creatures is there's just less gravity to start with. So you can have a giant dragonfly if the gravity coefficient's lower.
Right.
Second is the oxygen content. A lot of creatures in prehistoric Earth were bigger when oxygen in food was more abundant.
Right.
So for these sandworms, my logic is that they're eating humans for the moisture and the fun of murdering them. Because the human body is 80% water. You don't need a ton of water to life form ratio for basic functions to exist on a worm. Worms do not need a lot of water, but they do need some water. As for their size, I like to think that the planet wasn't originally a desert, and the worms are the reason it's a desert, and they spend most of their time asleep, only waking up to sip water from the life forms. Plus, in the 500-page book with 10 following books and glossaries, I think if we look it up, I think he's got you. I feel like our author here will have an answer somewhere in this text, and we just haven't found it yet.
That is true. If anybody does know more about Dune than either of us,
Please explain
feel
the
free to
worms in
chime
the
in.
chat. Actually, explain anything you want in the comments. I would love to see the comments and they explain the Dune worm physics and call us like, you amateurs! Clearly, they eat people so they can then channel their voice energy to create cellular structures out of sand. Please, I would love it.
I mean, but the giant monsters and stuff like that, they don't necessarily break my suspension of disbelief. Like, I'm still willing to watch a movie where a giant monster exists. I just low-key always wonder, like, scientifically speaking, the gravity is a pretty huge factor in how large animals can actually get, because, like, in terms of being on Earth, we don't have any organic materials that can support their own weight beyond a certain size.
So to follow up on that, so to get away with giant monsters in my own book, they're technically, most of their form is created by, basically I had to make up a magical particle, and most of their body is actually comprised of this particle, where they're largely hollow, but their outer structure is crystalline, and the energy they need to exist is largely siphoned from the planet's own life energy itself. So effectively, my giant monsters get this big because they're basically a cancer on the planet.
Mm-hmm.
So in case of these worms, if you think of like the planet as a larger ecosystem, it's entirely possible that they're so big because they're almost the planet's natural defense system.
Or, like you were saying earlier, they could be the apex predator of the desert, and they were so efficient at being an apex predator that they caused the whole rest of the planet to become a desert.
Exactly. So, as a perfect segue into our dragon question of the week, giant monsters into dragon tracks out, our question comes in, what is your favorite animated dragon?
Ooh. Favorite animated dragon? Are we talking like traditional animation or like 3D animation? Or both?
I'm going to say both. I haven't actually seen the movie. Sorry. I'm going to stop you right there. It occurs to me this is very similar to a question we've had before about animated dragons, so I'm going to lock you into CG dragons.
Well, that's all right with me, because my response was going to be, I believe the movie was called Dragonheart, where Sean Connery was the dragon.
That is excellent.
And the CG definitely. I haven't seen the movie in a long time, so the CG probably has not aged well. But I had some fond nostalgia for that movie. Oddly enough, because I also love James Bond, so I was like, Sean Connery is a dragon. Oh, let's go see that.
That's fair. So my default answer is to answer Toothless. But if we're going to like interesting dragon movies, as this question just kind of mutated on us a bit, I just feel like Dragonheart, I feel like if we had the technology as further away from being an animated and more being like a CGI dragon inserted into something. And if we're going on that topic, oh man, I loved how Reign of Fire was just post-apocalyptic dragon movie. Like, the idea of parachuting down with modern technology, like, I love when monsters just appear and completely destroy us. I love it. So having people parachute down with nets, jumping out of a plane, trying to catch a dragon to defeat them, that was beautiful. So, if we're going just straight up movies that were added in with, let's go, what do we call, let's go with our new official term for this is live action CGI dragons will be this category. CGI dragons made for live action.
That way you can't just default to Toothless because, well, I mean, he is pretty much the apex dragon.
Oh, yeah. So, I mean, if we're going for live action CGI dragons, I mean, they did a great job on the Charizard and Pokemon Detective Pikachu.
Not technically a dragon?
Yeah, fair enough. So I'm going with the CGI dragons from Reign of Fire. And until we get that live-action Metroid movie where it can be Ridley the Space Pirate Dragon.
Oh, yeah. Ridley the Space Pirate Dragon. If we ever get a live-action Metroid, that is a video game that deserves to be adapted into a movie.
Absolutely.
That would be... That'd be
Right?
a great movie.
I agree. And to follow up with that, our random question of the week. Buffering. All right. Our question comes if you could be the main character from any non-animated movie, who would you choose?
The main character from any non-animated movie.
Mm-hmm.
Huh. Hmm.
Note, if you just say a Disney movie because they did it both each time, I'll allow it, but I'll glare at you a little bit.
No. This category is so wide open. It's like, oh man, there's. What do I? Then I got to think of a main character and what they actually accomplished. And
It's kind of funny if you go with not animated to disclude if they're also animated, because that just gets rid of every superhero. It's like, yeah, no, Superman's also animated, Batman's also animated, Captain Marvel's also animated.
Yeah. Well, okay. Well, I'll flip this on its head while I'm buffering myself. What would your choice be? There, Richard.
Bruce from Bruce Almighty is definitely a pretty solid option. Because then I just get to be God. Like, that's a pretty solid option. It's kind of weird, because as much as I love action, drama, tragedy, I kind of want to pick a character that would actually be good to be as a human being and not just, you know what? Nah, screw it. To heck with all that. I'm going to be Legolas. He's better than you. He can jump, he can climb, he can swing, he can shoot. He can live for thousands of years. Yeah, no, I'm picking Legolas.
That is a pretty solid character choice.
Like, sure, you have life and death battle, but most of his life's just chilling in vineyards, being great.
You know, I wouldn't mind being this is probably gonna be contentious choice, but Jaden Smith from the new Karate Kid.
You know, the funny part of that is because, yeah, you also get to be Jaden Smith. Like, I understand the point of it should be the Kung Fu Kid. He's learning
the Kung Fu Kid.
Like, I don't want to poke your hole full of your movie, because being that character, I see the rationale and I can get behind it. I'm not supporting that movie, but I'm supporting your choice as that character.
Yeah, the random kid that doesn't deserve to be as good as Kung Fu as they are, but they get a sweet secret master.
I mean, also with Cobra Kai on Netflix, like, Ralph Macchio in The Karate Kid is also a surprisingly legit thing, because he learned martial arts and then he grows up to be a well-rounded adult with a wife and kids in a car dealership. Like,
ooh, I feel like I might have chosen the original Karate Kid if I'd actually seen Cobra Kai.
Fair enough. So, special thanks to our question submitters. They will enjoy their free digital copies of the Waltz of Blades Deluxe. And I also want to give a special shout out to our supporters on Patreon, allowing our podcast to be on Spotify, Google Play, and all your podcast locations.
Yeah, thank you to all of our viewers and listeners for their support. Enjoy your unspecified time between now and when you hear the next episode.
And as a fun mini game, anytime you watch a movie that's sci-fi, just try and figure out what they borrowed from Dune. And with that, take care and watch out for sandworms. Bye.
Bye.